Probably at some point in your educational journey, you had to evaluate the type of learner that you were. You probably labeled yourself either a visual, auditory, reading, or kinesthetic learner. The problem with this is that it's mostly inaccurate, potentially completely untrue, and likely harmful on your educational journey. On this episode of Elevate, we talk about the myth of the learning style, how it can impact your ability to succeed in anesthesia school, and what the evidence actually says about learning and how you can use that to your advantage in CRNA school and to pass the board exam on the first try. I'm Joshua Olson, Assistant Professor and Assistant Program Director of Nurse Anesthesiology and co-founder of Elevate. Elevate exists for one reason, to help you succeed in your CRNA program and pass the board exam on the first try. Many times I've heard CRNA students mention their personal learning style. They say things like, I don't read the book because I'm an auditory learner, so I just listen to the lectures. Or maybe they say things like, I don't take a lot of notes because I'm a kinetic learner. I need to interact with the material to learn it. I can't do it by taking notes. The problem with these statements is that there's really no good evidence that there's any truth to individual learning styles. Most of the evidence for learning styles is anecdotal and self-reported. So instead of doing double-blind tests that randomize groups of learners to determine their learning style, almost all the research on this topic is based on the learner's preference. Participants take an inventory to determine how they best like to learn, and based on these personal preference inventories, a supposed learning style is determined. Like I mentioned before, the most common of these is the visual, auditory, reading, writing, or kinetic one. That's VARK, V-A-R-K, right? But there are dozens of these. There's dozens of different types of learning styles out there. What's funny is the VARK one that we've talked about so much and you're probably familiar with is probably the least validated and least evidence-based out of all of them. And this is not a benign problem. Trying to pigeonhole your learning style or tailor your specific learning needs based on your style actually leads to worse outcomes. In fact, there's no study that shows catering to a learning style leads to better outcomes. One of the big problems is that how students like to learn isn't necessarily how they should learn. It isn't necessarily the best way to learn. And to be honest, if you had a choice in how you want to learn, you'd probably just like to sit and watch interesting YouTubes, right? Isn't that what you're doing right now? You'd probably watch a TED Talk or listen to a podcast or whatever. But this is essentially entertainment. It's education by vegetation, and everybody would prefer that. However, when you're trying to learn something complex or remember large volumes of material, this method just isn't effective. Not on its own anyway. You may prefer it, but that doesn't mean it's what's best for you. So is there anything we can learn from the concept of learning styles? Even though there isn't good evidence to support these learning style theories, there is actually a thread of truth in them that's very helpful in your learning. So while you may not have a particular learning style that is best for you, the idea that there are different ways to interact with the material is true. There's no evidence that a supposed auditory learner will learn best by listening only instead of writing. There is strong evidence that if you listen to the material and interact with it in different ways, is an effective way to learn. I like to call this multimodal learning, and we love multimodal in anesthesia, right? And what's true in the anesthesia world is also true of learning. You want to attack things from different angles. Just like you want to manage your patient's pain by hitting it from all different ways, you should do the same thing with learning. You want to treat the pain right from different parts of the pathway, right? Transduction, transmission, modulation, perception. Do the same thing in learning, but with different learning methods or different learning tools or ways or styles. There's good research on this. If you want to memorize and understand the brachial plexus, would an auditory learner say, I'm only going to listen to somebody describe the brachial plexus? No way, of course. It'd be a terrible way to learn the brachial plexus, right? You'd actually want to have someone describe it, where it is in the body. Maybe you want to go to a cadaver and actually see it and look at it. Maybe you'd want to draw it out yourself or watch somebody drawing it out and talk about it. Maybe you want to look at a picture of it and start covering up different parts of it so you can identify the different parts of it by memory. You want to learn it from different angles. The idea that an auditory learner would just sit and listen to someone talk about it is crazy. Just like an Olympic runner doesn't just run when they train, they ride the bike, they swim, they weight train. You should do the same thing when you study. Or just like a concert pianist doesn't only play their performance pieces when they practice, right? They do the scales, they play old songs, they play with other musicians, they listen to the same pieces that they're going to perform with, played by others, right? You should do the same when you study. you should mix it up. Multimodal learning. Let's talk about a few different techniques that you can use to implement multimodal learning. I'll mention a few of these here, but this list is limited. There's lots of other techniques you could use. Obviously, one method is to listen to lectures. You can record their lectures if your faculty allows you to record lectures. You can listen to others teach on the same topic. I know my students love doing this, right? I'm guessing you do too. If there's a topic they don't understand or that they're struggling with, they listen to it, right? They find it maybe on YouTube or some other trusted source and watch someone else's take on it. Just remember that if you're watching an outside source, make sure it's trustworthy. I realize the irony of me saying that since I'm on YouTube right now, but just be careful if you're watching something outside source, make sure it's trustworthy. Or we could take this another way. You could actually give the lecture. Did you know one of the best ways to learn is to actually teach something? So instead of just listening to the lecture, how about you put it up on a PowerPoint? Put the PowerPoint up on your screen and you give the lecture. You explain the concepts and describe the material. It works best if you have an actual learner on the other end of it that you're trying to teach them the material, but maybe one of your classmates or whatever. But you don't have to have that. You could just do it in front of your mirror. This is a great learning tool, just figuring out how to teach it to someone else. Another way is writing. Did you know that the physical act of writing is actually a better way to remember something than typing? The actual act of making your body create the letters puts the information in your brain in a new way. So if you're trying to learn something complex or you're struggling with something, maybe start writing it out. I often tell my students if they're struggling with a concept or something that's difficult for them, start writing it out, start taking notes on it. The physical act really helps you. One last technique that I'll mention is quizzes and exams. I talk about this in other videos, but quizzes and exams are not just a measure of what you know, they actually help you remember the material. When you're quizzed on a subject, you're much more likely to remember it. So when your faculty gives you lots of quizzes and tests, you should take them. It's a great way to learn. You can also use this to your advantage by writing your own questions or taking someone else's quizzes or practice tests. The process of writing out questions is a great way to learn. To write a question stem out and then a bunch of distractors for a multiple choice question is really where you have to master material. It's a very great learning tool. A distractor, by the way, is a wrong answer, but it sounds plausible on a multiple choice. So trying to learn through a dedicated learning style is not only just wrong, it's probably been hurting you. You should be doing the opposite. You should be learning in multiple different ways, multimodal learning. I encourage you to try this today. Mix it up a little bit. Are you doing this already? If you are, post about it in the comments. Have you had success? What do you think? Be sure to watch our other videos on how to succeed in CRNA school. And if you like this content, be sure to subscribe. Remember, Olivate exists for one reason, to help you succeed in CRNA school and help you pass the board exam on your first try. See you soon.